Tomorrow's event is shaping up to be way less certain than we'd all thought, and now we hear about Mac Studio. In this episode, we'll break down what that could be and run down what we expect to see tomorrow. Want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours? Subscribe and ring the bell. So Tuesday at 1800 UTC, we'll be getting our look at what's next for Apple in the Peak Performance event. We'll dig a little deeper into the name as we go along, but bear in mind it's spelled as Peak with two E's, not Peak as in Pinnacle. Then we'll try to pick apart the studio rumours around the Mac Studio and the Mac Studio display, which is resurrecting yet another name from Apple's past. So as close as confirmed for tomorrow, we should be seeing the iPhone SE and the iPad Air 5th generation. Neither of these is particularly exciting, with the iPad Air basically playing catch up to its annoying little brother, the iPad mini, getting the same A15 chip, 5G wireless option and the centerstage camera that even its poor cousin the iPad 9th generation with A13 inside already has too. The iPhone SE 3rd generation also gets basically the same updates, 5G support and the A15 chip, and there have been mixed reports about a camera improvement too, although that is unconfirmed. It'll be interesting to see if the A15 gives the iPhone SE access to the same cinematic camera modes and camera filters that were introduced for the iPhone 13, but clearly too premium for the poor iPhone 12 Pro Max users like me. Peasants. There have also been reports that the SE could see a price drop to make it even more competitive, although recent rumours suggest that the current A13 powered SE might actually just stay around at a very competitive $199, although only in some limited and emerging markets. That would be super cool from a price fighter point of view, but kind of boring from a what's the coolest new thing point of view. There's also another presumably iPad device that's been registered along with these two, and there were reports that we would see an update to Apple's cheapest iPad as well, possibly bringing the A14 into the mix. There's a possibility that the extra model numbers that we saw are actually just regional variations of the iPad Air with different cellular bands, but there's also an outside chance that the M2 makes its debut at the event and the iPad Pro gets an update, although I'm sceptical on that one, but we'll be definitely coming back to M2 a little bit later. Then we get to what I care most about, what's interesting to me and most of my audience, the Mac. Even though the iPhone SE will outsell the Mac in all of its forms, probably combined handily, it's also just not that much fun for me to talk about. From the registrations that we've talked about before in the EEC database, we have 2 desktop Mac slots to fill and a single laptop form factor. We've also heard from so far 100% accurate display analyst Ross Displayman Young that the panels for the larger iMacs won't be ready until around the summer, potentially for a June release, which would line up perfectly with Apple's WWDC, the developer conference. So let's kind of workshop around what would be filling those 3 slots, and remembering that those are the ones that are potentially ready to launch at this event, and then we'll get on to what on earth Mac Studio could be. Now it should be pointed out that Mark Gurman has said at least one Mac, so again, his usual way of hedging his bets, so that regardless of what happens, he won't get any minus points on the Apple Track website, but I think the 3 are most likely to be what we see. So we'll start off with the laptop, as we only have one slot here. Apple's MacBook lineup for the M1 generation seems to be complete. We have the entry point M1 Air at $999, MacBook Pro M1 at $1299, $1799 for the M1 Pro MacBook Pro, and 16-inch MacBook Pro starting at $2499. We also heard that the 13-inch MacBook Pro model was being produced through the Lunar New Year, where the factory would normally have been shut down in China. Specifically, this was to have something ready for this event. So I'm pretty convinced that we're going to see an M2 make its debut here, but I also don't think it will be called a MacBook Pro if that's the case. I've covered this before, but we've heard that the MacBook Air will be getting a price bump when it's redesigned and it gains the mini LED displays. So it makes sense that as mini LED is being pushed as a premium display option and that Apple is struggling with supply on those, this older design with the older display would come out as the new entry point, the MacBook M2. You get a fan, you get a great battery, but you probably don't get all the fun colours, although I'd love it if Apple went with a white anodized finish on these. All the nostalgia. Maybe a black version too? Would that be too cool for a MacBook? Let me know in the comments. I guess that the M1 Air could hang around as well for a little bit longer, maybe at $899 or $849 even, to make the Mac even more accessible. And onto the desktops. We originally thought that we'd be getting a pair of Mac Minis, and I still think that's probably most likely. We've seen what we expect to be the Mac Mini redesign, and this body shape could easily contain the M2 or the M1 Pro and Max options. A few people messaged wondering if the Mac Mini would have enough thermal capacity for the higher end chips, to which I say 1000 times yes. The redesign seems to have the same magnetic power connector as the iMac, which 100% means that the power supply will be moving outside of the body and into an external power brick. That makes way more space inside for a cooling system, as well as less heat to dissipate in the first place, because the power supply isn't there getting warm. Now, the cost of this is a less elegant cable, and I'll take it. So that's what I think we'll be seeing, M1 Max and M1 Pro, as well as M2 in a Mac Mini. But there are other possibilities. iMac, for example. Not the 27-inch that we've been hoping for, but could Apple put an M1 Max in the 24-inch we already have? I don't see why not. It's a brand new enclosure, and I'd be shocked if Apple's engineers designed it for only as much heat output as the current M1 does. That would be very short-sighted. So there could be an option here, and there's no real reason we'd have heard any rumours about it, because the current production line would be doing it with just a different board inside. Simples. A bigger iMac. As mentioned, it seems that those displays aren't ready, so I think that's unlikely, and I'm sad about it. I would love to be saying, yes, we're getting new iMacs, but I just don't think we will. Of course, it's possible, but it's unlikely. Mac Studio. This is the one that you've probably come here to listen about. What does Mac Studio even mean? Well, we really don't know, but it could well be the midpoint for Apple between the Mac Mini and the Mac Pro, with more power than we've ever seen in a small form factor before. And you bet your bum we got Apple tomorrow on the job to make some renders. Think Apple G4 Cube for the 21st century. And given the amount of retro Apple products on show at the Unleashed event last year, with that Palo Alto garage filled with nostalgia and music, we could even see a G4 Cube at the event intro. If so, get excited. This Mac Studio could be our M1 Max Duo chip. So we've seen the die for the M1 Max chips, and there seems to be what looks like an interconnect at the bottom of the chip, where it could be attached to another M1 Max. So perhaps that's how all of these M1 Pro and Max chips have been made. With the Duo as the standard chip, they get cut there for the M1 Max. Those that have a full dual die working get set aside to be put into these highest end chips. Those with one full chip working, they go to a Max. With slight errors on them, they go to the M1 Pro pile with some of those extra bits cut off. And also the ones that have issues even on the M1 Pro part of the chip go into the binned models. The plot thickens. So this basically goes from the perfect chips down to the less and less perfect ones as you get into your pros. So if we're truly getting the M1 Duo in the Mac Studio, that'll be overtaking a number of the bigger Mac Pro Intel models in performance numbers, and that's very exciting. We're also hearing about the Mac Studio display, and it sounds like this could be the replacement to the Pro Display XDR. Reportedly 36 inches in size, 7K resolution, and with the A13 that we heard about before inside, to assist with the workload that it would place on a Mac, possibly with its own version of something like DLSS, which will dynamically up-res your content on the display itself. So if you're watching 4K content, you could watch it in 7K on the display. Sounds pretty good. Now, Studio Display is something that Apple has used as a name in the past, typically for their 4x3 displays, while the widescreen versions got the Cinema Display name, which makes sense. Now, I don't expect that we'll see the Studio Display or the Mac Studio released at this event, but let's again think about that event name. Peak Performance. Perhaps we'll be getting a sneak peek of what's coming later, maybe this summer, for Apple's performance version of Apple Silicon. Normally, Apple doesn't do too much of this, but it's a product unlikely to cannibalize the current sales of the rest of their line, so it makes sense. Just like when the Apple Watch was revealed way before the launch, because it doesn't step on the toes of other products, and it makes sense to do it early. But let me know your thoughts on all of this down in the comments, and if you have any questions, use hashtag iCaveAnswers, and we'll get them into the next show. Before I finish, I have to give a huge thank you to the incredibly generous donations to Ted's Pocket Money. My wife was blown away, so thank you. There are a couple of our viewers that gave huge donations, and you guys know who you are. I don't know how public you want to make these, but please know that they are appreciated. People have different usernames on YouTube, so I don't know everyone, but thank you regardless. Now, let's just get excited for tomorrow's event. If you have any questions about it, use hashtag iCaveAnswers down in the comments, and we'll be answering your questions before the event. After the event, I'm actually working tomorrow night until the event takes place. Hopefully, we'll be finishing just as it starts. We'll be watching it with my boss at work, who is also very much into Apple stuff, but we probably won't be doing an immediate live stream afterwards. We might do one later in the evening once the dust has settled, once we know a little bit more about it, once Apple has put out their stuff. That will probably be kind of mid-afternoon in the US, late evening here in the UK, but let me know if you're excited about that, and we'll get it scheduled in. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you later.